All right, good evening everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Holman Wang. I actually live 5 blocks from here, so I'm a Drive resident, and it's great to be here. I am a part-time lawyer and a full-time children's author and illustrator, and as far as I know, Vancouver's only official Lucasfilm author. So anyways, if anybody knows another one, let me know. Okay. I do have some Star Wars bona fides, I think. There's my brother and I. When we were kids, my brother Jack's got a lightsaber. I think I'm actually doing some kung fu, but whatever. But my brother and I work on the books together, and one of the series that we have is called Star Wars Epic Yarns. And in a nutshell, we abridge adult stories into 12 words and 12 images, and that's all we do. So these are word primers for little kids, storytelling vehicles for older kids, and ironic coffee table abridgments for adults. So all ages board books. Now, notwithstanding the fact that my brother and I went to the National Science Fair 4 times when we were in high school, I've kind of lost my science-y side. So I apologize. It's going to be heavy on Star Wars and light on science. But this is wool. If you see up here, we make our illustrations through photographing wool figures. So the figures that you see on the stage are not plastic. They're made out of wool. They start off like this, okay? They start off with this soft roving. And the technique that I use for making the figures is called needle felting. And this is a microscopic image of a wool fiber, and it's got these scales on them. So that's what makes them itchy, it makes wool itchy, and that's what also makes wool stick together when you either rub it together with some water, or you actually physically, mechanically, sort of integrate and mesh the wool together with the needle. The theory of how felt was discovered was that somebody just decided they were going to put some wool in their shoe way back in the day, and they walked around all day and their feet were wet and sweaty, and with all that mechanical abrasion, when they went and got their wool, it was a piece of felt. Right, what you're going to see now is my technique, which is not a wet technique, but it is a dry technique. It is needle felting. It's you're going to see a time-lapse video where I'm finishing off a figure by stabbing the wool repeatedly. See if this works. Sorry? Okay. Okay, here we go. So the wool fibers are sort of integrated with what is already there with a specialized barb needle. Those barbs hook onto the wool, and you're basically entangling the fibers. And here I'm adding the nose. Here I'm adding some different colored wool to add the hair, eyes. So it's a needling process to create these sculptures. And then you can put on colored sheets of wool for the clothing. And it just gets stabbed right onto the body. There's some buttons, a tie, and that's a couple of hours of work in a minute or so. So the very first series that we cut our teeth on was called Cozy Classics, and we abridge adult classics like Moby Dick and Pride and Prejudice into 12 words and 12 images. And our technique for making the images involved 3-dimensional set making, like this fake forest that I built in my studio with a real fire pit when I lit a real fire and then took a photograph. And here's the final image of Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn camping. And here I'm wearing some very attractive hip waders here out at Dease Slough in Delta. And I've got a little raft and I'm pushing that into the water. And this is the final image that I captured. And so we cut our teeth on that series, and then we moved on to the Star Wars series. And so we have done these board book abridgments for each of the 3 original Star Wars movies. And then we felted a whole family of Star Wars characters, and here they are. And these are all done at an exact 1:7 scale, so they're all 7 times smaller than real life. So here's an image from the book, from A New Hope. this X-Wing fighter flying towards the Death Star. And here's our first little bit of science, which is, of course, the blur in the background. A blur, a motion blur, when it's captured on film, is just the integration of many points in time, right? An object moving through space in many points in time. And so I needed to create this particular image without using digital effects, because we try to stay away from digital effects as much as possible. So this is how I did it. First I built the X-Wing fighter with some cardboard and put some craft felt on top to make it fuzzy. There's the finished X-Wing fighter. And then I built this big giant Death Star wall that didn't have to look like the Death Star, just needed to create light and shadow. And then I stood behind my X-Wing fighter, and then of course, as I took the photo, just gave it a tug. And then I used the Photoshop to take out the 2 pegs, and then the final image in the book looks like this. So, you know, from a science perspective, our human eyes need to, you know, we're very used to seeing this motion blur. And if you watch, if you ever watched a movie or played a video game that did not have motion blur technology, it would look jagged to you because every frame would be absolutely pristine still image. But our eyes are really used to motion and blur, and so lots of video games now incorporate motion blur technology because that's what our eyes are really naturally used to. Here's another example of the motion blur for the swinging scene for for Luke and Leia. And the whole background was just put on a platform with some wheels, and I just took the shot and gave the whole background a shove while I took the shot, so that there's that motion blur that conveys movement for us. Okay, so there's the beginnings of the trash compactor. And I didn't want to paint the walls, I wanted real rust. I wanted real iron oxide on the walls, and you can achieve that with a iron-based paint and then applying an oxidizing solution. And what you're seeing here is, oops, oh, I pressed the wrong button. Is there a pointer here?
Oh, middle.
The middle one. Ah, okay, right. So here you're seeing the rust appearing before your eyes. Only takes a couple of hours. Here's the sort of fully rusted trash compactor. And there's the final scene with all the, these are cut pieces of foam and rubber tiles and so on. Some of the sets were started off with styrofoam, and then I put concrete on. Cement to texturize it. Cement is the compound that arises when you heat up limestone and clay to 1400 to 1600 degrees Celsius, and then when you add water to it through a process of hydration, that solidifies. So there's the concrete added. Then I paint it, build a bunch of props out of plumbing materials that I find at Rona. A little bit of faux fur. And there's Ben Kenobi's hut while he's training Luke, teaching him about the Force. Okay, what's next? More concrete. And this is for the Creature Cantina scene with Han Solo. And then again, here's me adding some quick-set concrete to some pillars for the final scene in our version of Star Wars: A New Hope. Also the movie, the Yavin medal ceremony. All right, styrofoam. Styrofoam is a synthetic polymer. It is polystyrene. Polystyrene can be in a solid form, which is basically plastic, or it can get foamed and turn into styrofoam. And for some of our larger figures, it takes a lot of time to do the needle felting to integrate the wool. So we start off with styrofoam core, and styrofoam melts or starts to get fluid at about 100 degrees Celsius. So what you can actually do is you can actually take a hot knife, special crafting tool, and start to sculpt the styrofoam by basically cutting it and melting it away. You guys know who this is going to be, right? Right? And then you can actually take the loose wool roving, and then you can needle that right onto the surface of the styrofoam, and the fibers will go right into the styrofoam, stick in, and then you can create your sculpture that way. And there's the Jabba the Hutt. with the wool over top of the styrofoam. Same thing with the Tauntaun. Started with a styrofoam core. Bought a cheap $10 plastic Tauntaun off eBay to help me sculpt in 3 dimensions. And then once it's surfaced and I put Luke on, I take the figure up to Mount Seymour, get a shot, and this is the final result. So this is actually, it looks like a snow-covered rocky hillside. It's actually a dirty snowbank pushed to the side of the parking lot by a snowplow. So it was a perfect illusion. When I went up to Mount Seymour, and it's like there's trees everywhere. Like I don't want trees on my hot shots, but these little bits of dirt, they kind of work perfectly as an illusion for rocks. So we have snowy mountains in Vancouver. Here I am again on Mount Seymour. We have forests in Vancouver. It's a great place to shoot, various environments. This is what I often do for location shooting is I bring milk crates out and then do a foreground set. This is Leia meeting Wicket. But we do not have ergs in Vancouver. An erg is a sand dune field. And I needed that for Star Wars. I needed desert for Tatooine. So my brother and I decided we were going to go and find an erg down in California. And these are the Imperial Sand Dunes, where George Lucas actually filmed parts of Return of the Jedi. You know the Sarlacc scenes where there's that ginormous mouth in the sand and people fall in and get slowly digested for 2,000 years? Well, George Lucas filmed here. So we thought, well, what the heck, we'll go there too. So here I am in the middle of nowhere. And we got this shot. I don't know, we probably could have dummied this up in a sandbox somewhere, but we did it the hard way, and we did it the right way. And then this was a terrain that was very close to the sand dunes, a sort of denuded hillside, very rocky, no plants, and it was perfect again for this Tatooine shot. All right. Who lives here? Anybody? Yoda, that's right. This is Dagobah, right? And so it's very simply set up with some tree branches, some painted yarn, some dirt. But Dagobah is a swamp. It has mists. And again, I didn't want to draw that with computer. So the only thing that we did with computer, by the way, is that lightsaber glow that you saw when Luke was holding a lightsaber. That I could not do in camera. But we needed mist. So what you see here are a couple of baking dishes embedded into my set. And then I put warm water into it. And then I put dry ice. And dry ice, of course, is frozen carbon dioxide. It sublimates at around minus 80 degrees Celsius, which means it goes directly from a solid state to a gas. And so this is what happens when you put dry ice into warm water. Let's see. Do this again. Let's run. Oh, geez, there's sound and everything. So I have my own working Dagobah set in my studio. Okay. And then I stick in the figures. And by the way, what you're seeing, the white stuff, the mist that comes out, the carbon dioxide is invisible, but it's super cold and it makes the water that's in the dishes and the moisture in the air condense into tiny little sort of crystalline particles. And so that white mist that you're seeing is actually the carbon dioxide freezing the moisture in the air. And so there's the final shot of Luke training in Dagobah. And it's very subtle, but if this mist wasn't there, some Star Wars nerd would be all up in my face about this, You didn't do it right. Okay, and there's Yoda here as well. Now Yoda in real life is only about 2.5, 3 inches tall. And so the leaves that I collected for this scene were actually bigger than Yoda. So I, of course, had to take all those leaves, put them in a blender, and scale them all down, and then sprinkle them around, and then they were the right size. Okay, and just some other images that show you, all the The whiteness that you see in the background is dry ice. Dry ice, because it is crystalline water, it's heavier than air, so it tends to fall down. So when it puffs up like that, it's me in the background sort of blowing at the dry ice vapors to get them to puff up. So that's what you're seeing. The white is actually dry ice vapors being caught in the light. More dry ice here, just a little bit here, some at the back. This is a plastic Han Solo piggy bank toy, by the way. You'd put money in his head like this. He stood up like this, the frozen Han carbonite piggy bank. So I just laid him down, cut some holes in him to put some lighting in him and so on. And the very last slide here, this is, again, more dry ice effect in the background as Luke battles Darth Vader. And the lightsabers and the Force lightning from the Emperor and the Return of the Jedi are the only digital effects, but otherwise everything is done in camera. So that is the science of Star Wars. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take a few minutes of questions.